Live from Arkansas's breaking news leader, Fox 16 News at 5:30 starts now.
Breaking news tonight, a verdict in one of the most high-profile murder cases in the state. Arron Lewis is given 2 life sentences with no chance of parole for the kidnapping and killing of real estate agent Beverly Carter. Good evening, everyone. I'm Donna Terrell.
I'm Kevin Kelly. The unanimous guilty verdict reached in less than an hour. The decision coming after 4 days of graphic testimony, including Arron Lewis taking the stand in his own defense earlier today.
Fox 16's Drew Petrimo live inside the Pulaski County Courthouse with more on the verdict and some of the reactions to it. Drew?
Well, good evening, Donna and Kevin. It seems like right after we left the courtroom for the jury to begin deliberations, stood around for a little bit, right back into the courtroom as they reach that verdict in just about 1 hour. Guilty capital murder, guilty kidnapping. As you said, he will be spending the rest of his life behind bars. Arron Lewis, that's because the capital murder conviction comes with life without parole, and also for good measure the jury gave him life on the kidnapping sentence as well. Obviously a very emotional time for family members. They were in the courtroom, a lot of tears flowing after that verdict came down. Moments ago we spoke with Carl Jr., Beverly Carter's son. Take a listen to his reaction to the verdict.
You know, you've heard all these horrible things about Beverly, but here are all the great things. She had a smile and a laugh that would just brighten up a room. She was an amazing mom, amazing wife, amazing grandma, and the world's a darker place without her. And I'm so glad I had that moment, and that the people that were present could know that she was truly remarkable.
That was the message that Carl Jr. Gave to the jury. He got the chance to give a victim impact statement talking about how much his mother meant to him and how much the loss has hurt the family. I want to bring in our legal analyst, Chanley Painter. She was in the courtroom with me the entire time throughout this coverage. The big kind of news of the day, the most surprising thing maybe that happened, Arron Lewis taking the stand in his own defense, called as a defense witness. Talk to me, Chanley, about what has to go through the defense's mind when deciding on putting someone with his record under these circumstances on the stand.
Well, Arron Lewis had an absolute right to take the stand in his own defense today, and he chose to do so regardless of the advising of his attorneys today, and they let him get up there and tell his story. However, the jury didn't buy his story tonight. Right.
So first he gets questioned by the defense. He lays out what he says happened, how he says he met Beverly Carter. He says he met her through his former wife, Crystal Lowry. This was some kind of a sexual escapade that they were going to be participating in. She ends up dying, Beverly Carter that is, while she's with Crystal Lowry, and he's not there. What did you make of that story? And we watched, both of us watched the jurors as he was telling it.
Well, it was a bizarre story that he tried to sell to these jurors, and the prosecution on cross-examination punched holes in every part of his story just about today. And you could see it in Arron Lewis's demeanor. He was very defensive, argumentative at times, most of the time with the prosecution, and this made him look like he was not reliable and not telling the truth today.
The prosecution obviously coming prepared for the questioning of Arron Lewis. You talked about punching the holes in Arron Lewis's story. One of the major points that they were trying to make, there was this ransom recording on Arron Lewis's phone, and they asked Arron Lewis if this was a consensual meetup, how does a ransom message get on your phone? His answer was that he made the recording himself on a computer program that he couldn't remember the name of. That had to be something that the prosecution saw as something that they could really attack.
Well, we were sitting in there, Drew, and we could see the reaction of the jury when the defendant was trying to make them believe this story, and they didn't look like they were convinced. The prosecution picked up on this right away, and he nailed it for what it was worth, and that really, I think, sealed the deal with this jury when they went back and had a less than an hour decision of guilty on both counts.
During the closing arguments, prosecutor Barbara Mariani, she went first. She kind of was very technical with how the jury should go about filling out the the verdict information, the verdict sheets, what they need to consider on each charge. Then Bill James came with his counter, talked about they hadn't proven the elements of the case. Then I thought it was key, and talked to me about this when John Johnson went back on the stage and talked about the kind of implausible nature of the story that Arron Lewis told. That seemed to be something that was important for the prosecution to be able to get that last word in.
That's right. Every trial, the prosecution gets the last word, and they took full advantage of that today. John Johnson pointed out that there are several holes in Arron Lewis's story. Here they are, and he listed them one by one, and that's the last word this jury heard when they went out for deliberation. They had a speedy, unanimous decision, and that means they did not buy any type of this bizarre story Arron Lewis was telling them earlier today.
Talk to me about that, the speedy nature of it. Obviously, it's kind of a voodoo science as to who wants them to come back fast, who wants them to deliberate for a long time. We were talking earlier, usually you kind of give them an hour for each day. They came back relatively fast. Were you surprised at that? And what does that say about what went on in that jury deliberation room?
What it says is that the prosecution brought the evidence, and they brought it beyond a reasonable doubt for every element of the offense of capital murder and kidnapping. And that was Barbara's purpose in her first opening or closing argument, was to teach the jury exactly what their proof meant, and she showed them, here's what we had to prove, and we met it today, and the jury believed her. And
in fact, we have some reaction from Deputy Prosecutor John Johnson after the verdict came down. I want to let you listen to that. If you play that, we'll take a listen.
You can never punish someone harshly enough. Death penalty, life in prison without parole, never evens the score. For Beverly or for any of the other victims that unfortunately we have to advocate for.
I mean, while he's spending the rest of his life behind bars, her family is spending the rest of their life without her. I mean, is that how you would look at that?
That's how I look at it. They're a strong family, and they're going to continue on. But as Carl Jr. said, that's a hole that can't be fixed.
So obviously, emotional time for the prosecution as well. They get, investigate these cases for a long time, present them in front of the jury, and it's a relief off their shoulders when these verdicts come down. I want to bring in reporter Marcy Manley. She's been here this afternoon. She was speaking with prosecutors, speaking with defense attorneys. What struck you about what prosecutors said after the verdict came down?
Nothing really struck me other than the appropriateness of their reaction. Barbara, you mentioned her and how she had been technical in the closing statements, but she was actually the one that spoke to the emotional aspect of the strength of this family, how close she got to them. And she actually said, if you want to get to know Beverly, get to know her kids and her family. And so that spoke to the close nature that I think the prosecution felt with this family. And then you heard Johnson say there that, there's no amount of time that Arron Lewis could spend in prison that they feel like makes up for what Beverly Carter went through, and he's getting 2 life sentences to spend without a possibility of parole on the capital murder charge.
Right, and you never know with what happens in these cases. They talked a little bit about the fact that they went in and they came out within an hour, relatively fast. I think he said that kind of showed what kind of case that they were working about. What was his explanation of why he thought they came back so fast?
I actually spoke to him just, minutes before we got the notice that the verdict had been returned, and he thought it would be much longer because of the amount of testimony. So even he was surprised by that, but he felt like it proved the strength of the case and the amount of evidence that they had the right man in custody and the right man was being charged with these crimes. And I even asked him, that was my final question to him, some people say that there's this waffle and you want to be sure that you've got the right person, and I asked Mr. Johnson, are you convinced that you have the right man in custody for this crime? And he said that he never had a doubt from the beginning, and he certainly doesn't now.
On the other side, Bill James and the defense team, obviously a difficult task in this case, considering that the evidence that was stacked on their client. People should remember that they were assigned to this case. Arron Lewis went through several lawyers, and their job is to fight as hard as they can for him. Again, a difficult task that they had, considering the evidence in this case. But Marcy, you were able to speak with Bill James after it. What was his message as this case wrapped up and obviously the verdict went against him?
obviously, I mean, no defense attorney wants to walk out with a guilty verdict for their client. Their job is to defend them to the best of their ability and hoping that a not guilty verdict comes back. But he said that, you know, there was enough evidence for the jury to find a guilty verdict. He didn't question the jury's finding. He said that Arron Lewis's statements to media early on, before he was ever brought on as the defense attorney, made his job harder, and that there were